Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Tutorials. So this is the next episode of Components of Tankiness, and this one is going to be on armor value. That's right, you heard it, armor value. Armor is a kind of complicated thing in Diablo 4, nowhere near as easy to understand as it was in Diablo 2, and I think it's important to talk about that for just a second. So what did armor do in Diablo 2? Well, it basically just prevented a monster from hitting you entirely. If the monster couldn't pass the check to hit you, it would go, okay, I'm going to bonk you on the head. And you're like, oh, no, what's your attack rating? And then it'd be like, oh, that's way too low. You're probably not going to hit me at all. And then it would check the defense and be like, yep, you're totally not going to hit that guy. And it would roll, and it'd be like, nope, yep, you didn't even hit him. Like, that's it. Wasn't even a connecting attack. In Diablo 2, that's the way it worked, but that's not the way it works in Diablo 4. How does it work in Diablo 4? Well, armor is tied into a bunch of different systems, and you get a lot of it from your equipment. So just having equipment, just putting pieces of gear on, will give you a pretty decent amount of armor, and you can also obtain armor from the skulls that you put inside your equipment, so you can get 250, 250, 250, and you can get a decent amount of armor from all of your other stats. There's also other ways to build your armor too, like for instance aspects like the I think it's called the aspect of disobedience, which gives you a pretty hefty amount of armor. It's not my personal favorite. There's one right there that's a perfect one. That's a 0.50, which is interesting. It does give you a lot of armor, and as armor scales, it will give you more damage reduction. Armor has many facets in this particular game, and you can read them just by holding your mouse over the ability. So the total armor granted by all of your equipped items, it reduces the physical damage that you take from enemies of equal level by 48%. So as I increase my armor value, I will increase the percentage of damage that I can reduce from physical. Physical that's it. So, like, let's erase this from the last video, and if you want to watch that one's already up. So, armor protects you from physical damage only, right? Of 48%. This is what I currently have on my character, which is 48%. It seems kind of low, but I don't rely on armor to save my life, and I will be talking about that later. Now, the other things that you can get from armor is the contribution to your non-physical damage. So armor in this particular game, and this may change in the future, so if they do change this, I may eventually update this video, so do be aware, and I'll maybe post a patch note version on this particular one, which I think right now we're at 1.04, because they have told us that they're going to be fixing this in the future, so do be aware of this if you watch this video, and it's not, recent. However, when you have armor value provides half of its bonus bonus to physical as non-physical reduction. Okay? Damage reduction, which is non-physical here, specifically, you hold your mouse over them and you will see that it says 24.8% of this is being supplied from my resistances, and it says 50% of this is being made up by my armor value. So if we take 49.7, which is what I'm currently at, and we reduce that by half, so our 49.7%, so 49.7 divided by 2 gives us 24.85. As you can see there, 24.8, and it doesn't show us the 0.5, so it's not showing us the second decimal point here, but it is 0.5. Now, 24.8 is the amount that we're getting from our resistance equipment. 24.8 is also how much we're getting from our armor because of the way that our armor actually calculates in damage reduction. Armor is absolutely amazing versus on-level monsters. And it actually says this. If you read it, it says reduces physical damage taken from enemies of equal level. So the 48% that you're seeing here is only applied versus monsters that are actually of equal level to me. There is a penalty system that is in place, and I do have a graphic for this. Let me go ahead and pull this up. This is a graphic that was shown to us by the developers during one of the developer conferences where they talked about damage reduction and how armor value works. And there was a lot of various information in here, and I can't really give you the exact specifics. This graph is not like 100% accurate because it is assuming specific variables which we cannot currently confirm. So the developers told us during the conference that this graph is of a level 30 character with an expected armor rating value of 2000, and then continues to show us how that damage reduction changes depending on the level of the attacker. So, as you can clearly see by the way that the curve works, the damage reduction that the level 30 character is getting decreases dramatically the higher level the monster is from their level. And the bigger that difference is, the worse the armor actually functions. So in Diablo 4, until we actually get even more information about the exact specifics of this, which I've seen some people try. There was a Reddit post a little while ago where somebody was trying to work out the calculations, but the math wasn't adding up. I actually kind of ran the calculations myself, and none of it really worked out. And quite a few people on that post were also doubting the legitimacy of it because none of it was adding up correctly. But the reason why I wanted to show you that graph, which I've taken off the screen, by the way, is I need you to understand that armor value is absolutely amazing if you are fighting monsters that are the same level as you. So this is important to just simply, we'll just write this on our little sheet here. So armor works great versus on level or lower level monsters. Okay, this is 100% great. It is absolutely amazing, right? So 100% amazing. The more armor that you stack against these on-level or lower-level monsters, the more significant the damage reduction will be, up to 85%. Now, there is a graphical glitch in the game at the moment that prevents the system from stopping at 85% like it's supposed to, but it does not go over 85%. It doesn't matter how high your armor goes, it will never go over 85%. And on top of that, it will also go below 85% as you increase the monsters that you're attacking. So like even if you're sitting at 85% versus on-level monsters, that does not mean you're sitting at 85% versus 10 levels higher than you, or 20 levels higher than you, or 30 levels higher than you, etc. So armor is pretty amazing versus the monsters that don't matter, but it tends to fall off versus the monsters that do. Now, one of the issues with this is that because half of your resistances are coming from your armor value, that when you get into this higher level content and your resistances or your armor starts to become less effective, so too does half of your resistances. So if I have, for instance, what was I sitting at? 47 or 49.7. So I'm sitting at 49.7% lightning resistance, right? Half of that is armor value. Okay, but if I fight a monster who is, say, I don't know, let's just pretend he's 50 levels higher than me, and my damage reduction from armor has dropped dramatically. So instead of being what I'm currently at, which is, 48%, let's say, for instance, my damage reduction versus this monster that's 50 levels higher than me has, diminished to the point where I'm sitting at maybe like 10% damage reduction, okay? Now, half of 10% is 5%, which is my contribution to my non-physical resistances, which means that half of my resistances are made up by my actual equipment, which is 24.8, plus the 5%, which I'm getting from my armor now, which means I have a total of, 29.8%, which means I've lost a significant portion of my lightning resistance, and now I am much easier to kill from that particular spectrum. So the resistances for the elements are now reduced severely because of this. So not only does your damage reduction go down, your physical damage reduction go down, but also because armor has this diminishing return versus higher level monsters, or this level penalty, whatever you want to call it, it becomes less and less effective versus those higher level monsters. Now, one thing you can do with armor is you can do what's called overcapping. Overcapping is a tradition from many games. Just because 85% is the cap doesn't necessarily mean you can't overcap your resistances or your armor, so that when you get into the higher level content, you get less of a reduction. Overcapping would be something along the lines of like this. Let's say versus a level 100 monster, I have enough armor value to equal 120% damage reduction, which is capped at 85%, right? So you take your 125% and you subtract it. So you go 125 minus 85%, which means you are now overcapped by... Did I type in the wrong number entirely? I typed in 85%, didn't I? So 40, you are overcapped by 40%. So you have a overcap of 40%. Now this overcap does nothing. Okay, so this is important to remember. Does nothing versus on-level content. All right, the only time that overcapping is ever going to have any effect on how your character plays is versus content that is extremely high level. So when you get into that dungeon that's 50 levels higher than you, and it's reducing your overall effectiveness of your armor by a drastic amount. Let's say just as a, you know, Ep4 instance, like, you know, these are not actual numbers, obviously, so don't, like, crucify me. But let's say when you fight monsters 50 levels higher than yourself, they reduce your armor effectiveness by 50%, right? So there's just a straight 50% reduction in how effective your armor is overall. Well, if you are sitting at 85%, right, and you subtract that, or you divide that by 2, you end up with 85 divided by 2 equals 42.5. So you end up with 42.5% damage reduction at the end of that calculation, right? But if you are overcapped by 40%, and you have that amazing 120% damage reduction, and you get that 50% reduction in the amount, so let's just divide that by 2. Why did it do that? We'll divide by 0, sure. So that brings us down to 60%. So 120 divided by 2 equals 60. So you can see how overcapping your armor can have an effect to protect you a little bit versus the level penalty. Now, the level penalty is pretty severe. I'm not going to lie. And stacking armor may not be the best way to protect your character. There have been many graphs compiled, and although some of them have been mildly inaccurate, but not completely inaccurate, the general gist of what has been figured out is that if there is an order to how effective resistances are, or just damage reduction in general, or all forms of damage reduction, it basically goes like this. Flat DR is greater than armor. Why can I not do greater than? I don't know why my greater than button is broken. And this last video, I was trying to do the greater than symbol too, and it wouldn't work. You know what it probably is? It's probably the font. I bet you there's no greater than symbol in the Exocet font. I bet you if I just put this to like a regular font. Yep, what do you know? So flat DR is greater than armor, which armor is greater than specific resistance, which is greater than all resistance. And we can compound on this a little bit more because flat DR is what I consider always active DR. So if we put some quotations here, we can say always active. Well, armor is always active too, right? So that means that we can probably throw in a different one here, which is conditional DR. So conditional DR is DR that may or may not always be active. However, you might think that that's worse than armor, but it's not. The truth of the matter is the conditional DR is still better than armor. However, there is a form of conditional DR that is worse than armor, and that is generally intermittent DR. Armor is a crucial component to making your character survivable. It is definitely something that you are going to need. It's something that you get just simply from your equipment. It's something that you get as a result of just simply, being a character who's alive within the game. You can add on additional bonuses to armor, like, for instance, I have 8.7% total armor value added from this particular piece of equipment. And stacking armor to the moon and back can make you into a tanky beast god versus on level gear, on level stuff. And that's kind of the most important thing to understand here, is that when it comes to armor in general, armor will protect you from physical damage. It also has half of a bonus to your non-physical damage. And on top of this, it works great versus on level or low level monsters, which is amazing. But it starts to fall off drastically the higher level the monster gets from you, and because it contributes to half of your resistances, it also means that your resistances will go down tremendously as a result. So whenever you are in higher level content and you're getting your butt kicked by lightning attacks, fire attacks, poison attacks, and all those other things that are just absolutely nasty, in general, it's usually armor's fault, because your armor is less effective in that higher level content than general. Also, just to recap, yes, you can overcap your armor. The cap is 85%, and overcapping your armor will have a hedge against the penalties which are applied to your character in that higher level content. But keep in mind that it really is more important to work on flat damage reduction than it is to work on armor value. You definitely want to work on flat DR, conditional DR, and then armor in that priority. And then intermittent DR is after that, and resistances are honestly just like bottom of the barrel. Not even really that important, to be honest. Until they fix resistances, which they said they're going to be fixing resistances in patch Season 2, I believe is what they said, is that we'll see some the fixes to the resistances in Season 2. Until they actually fix resistances, this is just the way that it works at this particular point. As always, I'd appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, and tune in for the next episode, and we're going to be going over some more tanky mechanics. And as always, keep watching.